could clap for that. That was lovely. Ring that a little louder than I meant to, but it will call us to attention and presence. Good morning. My name's Claire Helton. My pronouns are she and her, and I am delighted to be our service leader for today. Let me start by saying welcome. Whoever you are, whatever brought you here today, whether it was curiosity or community, obligation, I hope not. All motivations are welcome here. All people are welcome. And we are so glad that you are here among us today. This gathering is made more complete because of your presence with us. So thanks for showing up. And that extends to those who are watching us online. I'm trying to look at them in the camera. We're glad that you are here with us today as well. If you are a guest, hopefully you were handed a welcome pamphlet at the door. If not, be sure to ask somebody afterwards. We would love to put one in your hand. And you can also find out anything you could need to know on our website. That is uupensacola.org. And if you want to get on our mailing list, I believe there is a card you can sign out in the lobby to get our newsletters. So before we jump into announcements, I'll offer a quick reminder to check your phone, anything else that might buzz or beep in the next hour or so. I need this reminder every week to turn mine on silent so that we can all be as fully present as possible. Announcements. I will make my own announcement first so I don't forget it. With the stack. The out-of-the-box story circles are going to continue this semester on the second Sundays, but we're going to skip this month. So we'll start in February, and there's a lot going on in January. So during second hour on the second Sundays, and if you want to know more about what an out-of-the-box story circle is, find me after the service. I'd love to tell you about it. And now, the stack. We have a few for the new year. First and most importantly, Sunday Suites has been postponed to January 19th. So not to interfere with the congregational meeting that is on next Sunday, January 12th. So Sunday Suites will be the third Sunday this month. Bring your own suites next week. Thanks, Mary Beth. Please stay to help, if you can, help de-decorate the church. Today, after the service, we'll have a group of folks trying to get us unholidayfied. I should not try to make up words on the spot. Announcement from Hugh Ed, January 8th, the first lunch bunch of 2025 will be at Juan's Flying Burrito. Ed's over here raising his hand. That's at Alcaniz and Intendencia, 1 o'clock. As usual, see Hugh Ed for questions. Do you want to build a sense of community, help the congregation, and have fun? And do you enjoy singing? Come sing with us in our choir. There's no audition needed. You don't need to know how to read music, though knowing how to read words would be a big help. We rehearse most Sundays at 9. There's no midweek rehearsal, and we have lots of members who are not able to be here every week. So if that's the case for you, don't worry about it. Just come on and sing. You can see Laura Keith King right here on the front row, and she will get you on the choir email list. Let's see. Okay. 2 more. Guests at Our Table. The Guests at Our Table Fund is a UUSC nonprofit. They work to advance human rights and social justice around the world. We are collecting those boxes. They're out they have been out in the lobby. Hopefully you've taken one home. If you haven't, I think Joe Vincent is the one collecting them, and he's not back yet. So you probably have another week if you want to use that to collect some funds that we can donate to them. Was there something else about that, Kate? Oh, no, Kate. MLK Parade is next week. Sorry. I'm going to take a breath. It's not next week. MLK is just around the corner, and we need your help. We need your help for the parade. There are lots of ways you could assist, organizing on the day of, providing snacks and things to throw to the crowd, prepping the float. If you are willing and able to in any way, please reach out to Chris Brockway. And Kate added at the last moment for me that there is a box in the foyer to collect throws. So out by the doors you came in, there's a box. If you've got anything we can toss from our float, feel free to drop it in that box. Am I leaving anything out? Flag me down. Okay. So now that we have established all that is going on in the days and weeks to come, I'll invite us to get settled back into the present. As the choir comes up to lead us in some centering music, maybe you can close your eyes, find your feet on the ground, feel the weight of your body on the seat beneath you. Take a deep breath, maybe the deepest one you've taken all day. Allow your mind and your heart to catch up with your body and really arrive for this moment. I'm going to light our chalice as the choir leads us in a round. We normally offer spoken words here. We're going to light our chalice and reflect musically today in this round of number 362 in your gray hymnal, Rise Up, O Flame. You can listen or you can join 362.
Can we get our opening words? Thank you very much. I'm going to lead us in our opening words, if you could respond in the bold. We come here this morning to remind one another. To resist the headlong tumble into the next moment. Taking the time to look into one another's faces. This house of laughter and silence, memory and hope, is hallowed by our presence together.
I'll invite you now to stand as you are willing and able. We'll sing our opening hymn. It is from the hymnal, but we've chosen a more familiar melody, so you don't want to look at that. It's very confusing. You'll want to look at the words on the screen, and then you can remain standing after the hymn for our covenant. This is Creative Love, Our Thanks We Give. What number? 289, if you want to look at the words. Thank you. I'll invite you now to join me in reciting the covenant of this congregation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This next segment of the service, you can be seated. This is our time for sharing joys and sorrows. I want to mention at the start that we don't include this segment in the live stream so that we can share with one another with a little more candor the things that are on our hearts. We'll begin in a moment by lighting a candle for all of those joys and sorrows that exist outside the walls of this congregation. It is a big world, and it often weighs heavily on us, and we want to acknowledge the fears and the anxieties, as well as the tremendous beauty and joy that we bring into this space on behalf of our larger communities and our world. But one of my favorite hymns includes this line, I will weep when you are weeping. When you laugh, I'll laugh with you. And that's what this moment is about. And so I invite you, if you have something to share that has brought you laughter or tears this week, feel free to line up on either side, come forward, and we'll light a candle for each one named, and be sure to share your name before you speak. Could you come to our candles as we're lighting, and I'll hand the microphone. And we can now sing the children out to their time honors in the back. As you may or may not be aware, UUCP is a lay-led congregation, and we are a fully member-funded organization, so we rely on the generosity of our members to keep things running around here. There are a lot of ways that people give of themselves in this congregation, including from their checkbooks, but also of their time and energy and heart and soul and mind and strength. Those things are harder to collect in a basket. So at this moment, if you're able to give financially, we are going to pass our baskets. And you can give either through the basket, through the info on the screen, or through that draft that you set up years ago and don't even think about anymore. Our musicians will play for us as we reflect on the gratitude that we all have for all that it takes to keep us showing up here week after week. I now have the privilege of introducing our speaker for the day, Zachary Helton, who I also had the privilege of marrying 13 years ago this week. But enough about me. Zach is a writer and spiritual care practitioner, a board-certified chaplain. That board-certified part's still pretty new. I'm a proud partner. And I would say that Zach is most alive when he is speaking or writing about the ways that we can allow ourselves to connect to a bigger story, something larger than ourselves. So, would you join me in welcoming Zach?
Thank you. Several years ago, I had the chance to attend a writing workshop, and it was facilitated by a well-known writer in the mainline Christian world, and it was one of those workshops where you have to submit a piece weeks in advance for everybody to read, and then you gather around a table and you aren't allowed to say anything while they all take turns telling you what you could have done better. This might be the least fun way to have a writer's workshop. But the piece I submitted was this didactic short story that I had been working on during my deconstruction, and it was about a pastor and an intern meeting with a church member, sitting around drinking tea and talking about political issues. It was a real page-turner. And I remember sitting there while all the students took turns giving me feedback, trying to protect my feelings, and then it got to the facilitator, and I waited, anxious, because he was the only one I really wanted to hear from anyway. And as he looked back at my piece and then looked back up at me, I saw the look in his face and I thought, uh-oh. Well, he started, I appreciate where this is coming from, which is not a great way to start. But my main issue is that it's really just a bunch of people sitting around agreeing with each other on stuff. I mean, for a work of fiction, nothing actually happens. Ouch. My first reaction, of course, was, well, he just doesn't get it, which is a common early writer's tool to soften the blow. Except the truth was, he very much got it. It was me who had missed the point. I cringe when I look back at that piece, not just because it brings up a not-so-fun memory of being torn down by one of my heroes, but because he was right. There's no tension. There are no feelings. There is no growth. Because I was too nice to my characters, there's not much of a story. And the facilitator's words stuck with me, not just because he was right about my piece, but because he was right about me. His feedback hit at something deeper than just the story. It wasn't only that I avoided tension in my writing, I avoided it in life. I hated it. I didn't know what to do with it. It was an enemy to be avoided, not embraced or explored by any means, so why would I want to do that to my characters? And I thought about this years later when I read Robert McKee's textbook on storytelling. In it, he's writing about what he calls the substance of story, and McKee introduces a concept he calls the gap. The gap, according to McKee, is the crucial moment where a character has taken action to get closer to their desired goal, and it just doesn't work. It's where the subjective world of the character's mind collides with the objective world of reality, and a gap cracks open. It's a gap between the world as the character perceived it before and the truth they discover in action. It's the moment where Frodo and his friends are trying to get to the Prancing Pony Inn, and they do, but Gandalf isn't there, and they have to trust a stranger instead. It's the moment where they're trying to move on to Rivendell, but they can't because Sam makes a fire, and they're set upon by wraiths. It's the moment where they're trying to see Elrond, and they do, but the ring can't stay there, and they have to take it to Mordor themselves. I watched Lord of the Rings this weekend with my kids. I don't know if you can tell. The gap is an inconvenient element, sometimes incredibly painful. But from the meta view of telling a good story, it's unavoidable. Furthermore, it's only because of the gap that any kind of growth or transformation become possible. As McKee says, it's only by the power of the gap that a character is forced to dig more deeply into their human capacity or their hobbit capacity to be able to move forward and become more fully their truest selves. Without the great and terrible gap, Frodo never comes to a place where he's able to ride into eternity without fear, and he's still where he started, drinking with his gardener and eating way too many meals a day. Later, when McKee is defining the craft of storytelling, he comes to call it the art of creating within the gap, which is perfect. And that's what my story lacked in that workshop. And I mean both my written story and my lived story. I lacked a healthy appreciation for what the gap is. And in the time since, I've come to a very different relationship with the gap, not just in writing, but in many aspects of my life. It's not an enemy anymore. It's not only an enemy anymore. We've been through too much together. When I started to deal with anxiety attacks in grad school, it opened a gap that pushed me all the way down to the bedrock of my spirituality, showing me not what I wanted to be true, but what was true. When COVID hit and I found myself spending every day at home with my 4- and 6-year-old children, it opened up a gap that forced me to confront a lot of my beliefs about productivity and patience. The gap meets me at the hospital where I work, where I try to help people find a stable enough foundation to create within the gap. And I see it when I open a news app and 100 headlines, 100 pieces of bad news, 100 invitations to embody my deepest values. The gap is still terrible, and I'm not going to say we're friends. but I do have a lot more respect for it. I don't see it as toxic, but sacred. And sacred things are sometimes scary. The more I write and the more I live, the more I realize that this theory of creating within the gap isn't just a basic theory of storytelling, it's a basic theory of spirituality. So this morning, I'd like to explore what it means to treat the gap as sacred. Not to minimize the pain that it can cause, but to appreciate its capacity to do something beautiful. And the first thing we have to acknowledge if we're talking about the gap is that we have to be careful before we say anything, because we're talking about a paradox. Pretty much anything I say about the gap is going to be, on one hand, deeply true, and on the other, deeply offensively false. For example, the gap is a teacher, yes. It arrives with opportunities to move us along towards new life, but can you imagine saying that to one of the characters in a story you're writing? Neil Gaiman once told a story about another author who asked him, "Can you imagine having to meet your characters and answer for what you put them through?" Because the gap is a teacher and, at the same time, is a fierce adversary. It comes with sharp claws and blunt hammers to demolish the life that your characters love, because the gap is a paradox, as most spiritual things tend to be. A lot of spiritual traditions harmonize with narrative theory on this one. At the center of the Jesus story is an unjust execution, arguably the worst gap that could have been opened in his story, and it's followed, shockingly, by a resurrection. Does it justify the crucifixion? I don't know about that. But it's just the way the story works. At the core of Buddhism, likewise, there are four noble truths. Number one, there is suffering. Number two, we can work with that suffering. Number three, the suffering doesn't last forever. And number four, there's a path that leads us out of suffering. And again, if we were using McKee's language, I think he might say, noble truth number one, there is the gap. Number two, it is possible to create within the gap. Number three, the gap is not the whole story. And number four, there is a path that helps us move through the gap well. In both of these traditions, the gap is a paradox, at once devastatingly destructive and unavoidably important. So what does that mean for us? For me, it means that I've had to get over my assumption that the gap is either inherently good or bad. Because from the perspective of the whole story, dualistic categories just sort of fall apart. We wind up in this non-dual realm beyond the land of the right and the land of the wrong, in a field of isness. And the only thing I can say with certainty is that the gap is inevitable. It simply is. I don't have to label it. Just figure out what to do with it. This is what I love about the pragmatism of Buddhism. Noble truth number one, there is the gap. Number two, we can create within the gap. Now let's do it. Now this doesn't mean we can push ourselves to truth two before we're ready. Sometimes the gap is just too painful, and all we can do is sit in truth one for as long as we need to. You can't rush it with a character, and you can't rush it with yourself. When you do that, or when you try to do that, you get false, forced growth that falls apart the next time a gap opens up. It repels an audience and makes the people around you kind of uncomfortable. We give the gap the time it takes, and then when we're ready, if we're ready, we can move to truth two. Asking questions, taking agency, creating within the gap, which will set the stage for our next action. And that brings us to the next interesting thing about how the gap works. It's not quite as predictable in stories as writers often want it to be. Opening a gap doesn't necessarily mean your character will create in the way that you want them to. This may sound nuts if you've never tried writing, but your characters make their own choices. even if they're not the ones you want them to make. And sometimes those choices take them on a positive growth arc, and that's fantastic, but sometimes the arc goes south. Other times it just stays flat. It all depends on how or if your character chooses to create within that gap. So what makes the difference? There are certain things that your character can do that will lead them towards growth. They can listen to wise counsel, give themselves time to feel their feelings, seek out some perspective. These things turn the gap into this verdant shade of green that waters the seeds of the true self that they're becoming. This is what some authors call a positive growth arc. Let's take Aragorn, for example, since we can't seem to stop talking about Lord of the Rings. He surrounds himself with loyal friends and wise counsel. He is able to hold on to hope and to look at himself honestly. And so one gap after another moves him from a lonely ranger to the king of Gondor. That is a positive arc. And if you've never read Lord of the Rings, I'm sorry. There will be other talks for you. But for every Aragorn, there is a Smeagol. His is what authors call a negative arc. Here, your character faces their gap, but instead of making choices that move them closer to their true selves, they make choices, or refuse to make choices, that wind up digging them deeper into the false. Where Aragorn relies on friends and wise counsel, Smeagol isolates himself. He pushes his friend away, or more accurately, kills his friend, and then goes away to the mountains. Where Aragorn is able to find perspective, Smeagol fixates only on the object of his attachment, making him more fearful and greedier every day. And then finally, for every Aragorn and Smeagol, there are countless unnamed characters. They see the gap and just sort of stick to what they do best. They don't get bitter. They don't rally themselves. They just kind of choose to hunker down and go back to their gardening. And as a result, while the main characters come back with treasure, these characters stand on the side and watch. And this one's called a flat arc, even though that's kind of an oxymoron. Now, I'm not saying that either the flat arc or the negative arc are a bad thing. In fact, I think judging our characters or ourselves for the ways we react when we're in the gap is a great way to guarantee a negative arc. Our characters do the best they can with what they know. And so do we. Even Frodo yells at Sam. Boromir's arc goes all over the place before it lands somewhere beautiful. And then there are times when a gap is just too overwhelming and all it does is tear a character down. And what I'm saying is, when it comes to the gap's impact on a character or a person, it's also beyond good or bad. It's neutral. It's not the content of the gap that determines where the arc goes, but the way that your character chooses to create or not create within it. And the same is true, I believe, for us. And that brings me to my last question. If these unavoidable, paradoxical gaps open up in our character stories and move them towards something, what is it exactly that we want them moving towards? What do we want our characters to have become by the end of their story? And you might argue that there are infinite answers to this because there are infinite kinds of characters. But I wonder, if we look at some possible answers to this question, if we might discover that all these best selves we can imagine for our characters are, in a way, incarnations of one true unifying character, a true self drawing us forward in the story. And here's one way we could do that. Some authors will use what are called character archetypes to get some clarity on who their characters are and what they need. For example, the maiden in her arc needs to be able to leave her family to go out on her own. The king in their arc needs to learn to wield their power well, which means letting it go when the time calls. The crone in their arc needs to learn to let go of youth and re-engage society as an elder. At the end of all of the archetypes, though, there is the final, wisest character, the mage. This character has been through all of the arcs so far, has learned all of the lessons, and now must bring them all together into one final task: to let go and come into union with divine mystery. And this often means death, whether literal or symbolic. The final arc. On the archetype of the mage, author K.M. Wieland writes, "If we recognize that story structures always come full circle, we can see how the final character arc of the life cycle, the enlightened mage, is in many ways a return to the fulfilled child type, a child's deep connection to and instinctive understanding of life. In other words, the mage becomes the wise innocent, returning to the child's capacity for joy and innocence and trust and resilience." Think about Yoda or Dumbledore. And I'm not going to say Gandalf because I know you're probably getting tired of Lord of the Rings. The mage doesn't have to be old. They can be anyone. They're just an idea. But what if the mage is the true self, hiding under each archetype? What if the lesson they learn is the ultimate lesson that has to be learned in a dozen forms over a dozen archetypal arcs, all variations of this one? Because isn't that the ultimate task? To let go of attachment and aversion and trust. To let go of all fear or pride-based stories that they tell about who they think they are and engage the world with a deep vulnerability. This character has a peace that cannot be touched, a love that cannot be quenched, a freedom that is contagious. What if the mage is the truest self of any character we can imagine, and the gap is what they need to get there? And what if that's true of us too? What would it look like to engage the gap in our own lives and ask, what would the mage do? What attachments or aversions is this gap inviting me to confront in order to be free, in order to better serve the world around me? If this is my story, what does that look like? So, to close, let me ask again, what does it mean for us to cultivate a healthy relationship with the gap? To bow to it as sacred. To see the gap as an inevitable, paradoxical phenomena in which we are being invited to create, to respond. What would it mean to be intentional about how we create within the gap, the tools we use, the questions we ask in order for us to foster a positive growth arc and water the seeds of the mages that we really are? Amen.
Thank you. I will invite you to stand now as you are able and join us for our closing hymn. This one is also not in the hymnal, but the words will be on the screen, and the choir will come to lead us.
Travel along.
Thank you so much for being here today. I will extinguish our chalice now that we might carry the light with us as we go, while Zach comes and offers some closing words for us.
These closing words come from Rumi. I said, "What about my eyes?" And he said, "Keep them on the road." I said, "What about my passion?" And he said, "Keep it burning." I said, "What about my heart?" And he said, "Tell me what you hold inside it." I said, "Pain and sorrow." And he said, "Stay with it. The wound is the place where the light enters you." May we each stay within the gaps. May we create within them. And may they be the places where the light enters. Go in peace.
Remember to stick around if you can and help undecorate from the holidays.
That's why you don't want it? Oh, yeah. Are you doing Claire's job?
Well, technically it's for me tomorrow, so, I mean, next.
What are you doing? Oh, you're prepping.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Hello. Sorry.
Being somewhat similar, very much like
Yeah, I think Buddha was the ultimate sage, right? Yeah.
it's like when you get to that point, you can draw the teachings. The gap, basically, into your mind. Meditation.
Sure. I think it forces you to that place, right? I feel like when I was writing this, I thought every meditation for me is a kind of imposed gap, right? Like just stopping and letting your reality collide with objective reality, and just letting it go. Yeah.
Excuse me just a second.
Yes.
I want to give you
Hi. So you want to talk to me or him? Oh, yeah. Sorry. A lot going on.
I want to tell you about this microphone
Yes.
because it was bothering you. And
Yeah.
the best way to get it taller is the top 2 inches.
Yeah. I was trying to negotiate it's got a stabilizer down here. Yeah.
This is the perfect place for it to be for everyone.
Yeah.
This is the part that rotates.
Yeah.
So when you're short, it's here. When you're tall, it's here.
Yeah.
And people tend to move.
Grab down here.